can you invite non-Muslims into the masjid for a lecture or any other event? Sounds like a silly question? Let's see. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So this is an interesting question because it sounds so absurd. Why does it sound absurd? Well, that's what some people I have heard say. They've said that's such a ridiculous question. How can non-Muslims not be allowed into the masjid when we're living in their country and our masjids are in their country and they're built with their permission? Of course they should be allowed in. Of course, how are we else going to give da'wah? You see, there's a point that I want to make clear to the du'at, the people who are giving da'wah, the da'is, okay, as a plural. It's really important that you differentiate yourself from the ignorant people, and only someone who is ignorant genuinely will make such a statement, because there is nothing in Sharia, nothing that is a silly question. Everything is to be established and to be ascertained according to evidence clear, according to the Quran and Sunnah. See, the ignorant person is not the one who actually asked this question, it's the one who thinks that the question is ignorant. We're talking about the matters of deen. And just because the fact that every single masjid in the country allows non-Muslims to come, and because we have school days and open days and visit your mosque day and open inside day and God knows what, doesn't just mean because everyone does something that it's something which is straight out permissible. In actual fact, there are a number of scholars that considered it impermissible for non-Muslims to come into the masjid. And the reason why the ulama said that is because of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah At-Tawbah when He said, فَلَا يَقْرَبُوا الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ بَعْدَ عَامِهِمْ هَذَا. And so they are not to enter the sacred mosque after this year, therefore making very clear that the non-Muslims were not allowed to enter Al-Masjid Al-Haram in Mecca, the masjid which contains the Kaaba. It is upon this, of course, which the qiyas will be made. The verse is clearly speaking about the Grand Masjid or Al-Masjid Al-Haram, where in Mecca. Can this then be used to form an analogy with and apply it to all of the masajid? Actually, the action of the Prophet ﷺ proves that it isn't. We know for certain that the Prophet ﷺ allowed non-Muslims into the Masjid al-Nabawi in his time. Thumama ibn Athal, for example, al-Hanafi, and this does not mean that he came later and was a follower of Abu Hanifa, that was his actual name. He was actually tied up as a prisoner in the masjid. And subhanAllah, his story, of course, is an amazing story. We've already used part of his story without mentioning his name when we discussed the issue concerning ghusl, whether one has to make ghusl or not when they become Muslim. His story is a fabulous one, and obviously he learned so much, and that of course was the intention of the Prophet ﷺ. He wanted Thumama to be exposed to the Quran, to the Salah, to how the people actually have a deeper vision to life than what everyone else is just doing, going around buying and selling and doing what they want. And actually what they're seeing is people who value spirituality, who value the akhirah, the hereafter, more than what it is now. And so the scholars were very clear that if there is a benefit to be achieved, then they should be allowed to enter the masjid without any kind of problems. We know, for example, the wafd of Thaqif and the wafd of the Nasara of Najran. Wafd means delegation. They'd send like a kind of like a scouting party that would represent the larger tribe. So when they sent out these groups of people, small groups of people, they would come. So the delegation of Thaqif and the delegation of Najran was sent to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ received them in his masjid. He could have received them in many different places. There were many of the companions who had homes that could have been the place to receive them, but he chose that the masjid to be the place because there was a constant display of ibadah, a constant display of khair. They would actually hear things in their own language which they can relate to, and a lesson that can be learned, and also allow the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make an impact. And that's going to happen to the Arabs. People say that, well, how is letting non-Muslims go into our masajid going to have that impact? They don't understand the Arabic, they don't appreciate what we're doing, and so on and so forth. Well, first of all, let's look at the original question. The original question was, can we invite them in for lectures specifically? Well, I hope you now realize that absolutely yes, we can, because that's a very clear need. We are doing something specific for them, clearly, and in a language which they understand, in English. So let there be no doubt that this is something which is permissible, as seen by the action of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the real issue is that what about other times? What about during prayer times and so on? Should they be allowed to come in and observe and so on? I do like the fact that some scholars just try to put on the brakes on this issue, because the mind says, well, of course, they want to rush forward, we've got to give dawah, and so on. But I tell you what might happen, and it does happen, and it has happened in Muslim countries, especially, I'll just use this one example, maybe some countries in the Gulf, so maybe Turkey, for example. You go to some of their masajid in Istanbul, and they remind you more of a tourist attraction than an actual masjid. You'll see lots of tourist parties being guided around with someone who's explaining what's going on and so on, and only like a single line of people who are praying at the obligatory prayers. The rest of the masjid is just full of tourists who are just looking, oh, what beautiful architecture, oh, that's so nice, and so on and so forth. We don't want to turn the masajid into tourist attractions. We want them to remain as the houses of Allah, where the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is uppermost and prominent. And so that's why we need to be careful. Now, frankly, this kind of threat is only going to apply to big masajid, which are the central ones in a big city. Most of the mosques this will not apply to. So we're not really worried too much about this. However, I also want to say that we shouldn't be reticent, or we shouldn't be remiss about the impact of what the Quran can have, and the prayer especially, can have upon non-Muslims, even if they don't understand it. I remember an experience which happened with me recently. I was involved with a group of brothers who had an open day for the masjid, and the people who came, one of the unique things about this masjid is that they had actually designed it with a kind of like a viewing area. Now, I know that kind of sounds like we're in a petri dish, and that we're kind of being examined. I don't mean any disrespect in this kind of way, but it actually was designed in a way where there's the main hall, and then there's like a corridor with a glass wall where people could literally look down and see. Now, whether that was the original design of the masjid or not, it doesn't matter. It's an awesome place for people to actually stand, not get in the way, not feel awkward, and watch. And some of the participants, they were in tears. And I'm not going to kind of give you this kind of, one of those classic dawah stories that I went to Istanbul, heard the adhan, and it was so beautiful, and I became Muslim as a result of it. I'm not giving you one of those kind of wishy-washy stories. This is true. They were touched. I'm not going to say they cried floods of tears either, but they were touched because they saw the rawness of the sajda. They actually felt the pure submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which they could not possibly recognize in their lives. That was the impact of just seeing the prayer. When they were hearing the Quran, for them it was just something melodious, something which was nice upon the ear. There's no doubt it affects different people in different ways, but there is a benefit there. The Prophet ﷺ has allowed for it to happen. The original prohibition only applies to the Masjid al-Haram, so therefore it's not applicable to the normal masajid, and we should encourage our masajid to be open, to be that more transparent, especially in a climate of mistrust. It is one of our strong points. They are full. A lot of people see the contrast between other houses of worship, such as synagogues and churches, which are mostly empty and cold, and the warmth and the feeling of togetherness and the busyness and the hustle and the bustle of ultimately a spiritual house which is dedicated to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His dhikr. There are a few points that I just want to mention. The issue often comes up, one that makes a lot of us smile, the insistence of women having to wear hijab. Some of them so much so that you have this guy at the door of the bigger masajid with a whole bucket full of headcloths that he just kind of passes out, headscarves I should say, and then every woman kind of puts it on in some kind of loose kind of way, like the Queen does when she's going to Ascot, this kind of black kind of hijab. It's funny to look at. And I found this strange, and the reason I find this strange is because actually the Islamic, from a fiqh point of view, this is not supported in the Sharia, meaning that the evidence is not necessarily with this position. We understand the sentiment. We are trying to create a sense of sanctity. We're trying to ensure that people are modest when they come to the house of Allah. But I want to understand what is the meaning of modesty. Modesty, of course, is different between the non-Muslim and the Muslimah, the female Muslimah and the female non-Muslim. Meaning that, of course, the provocative areas of the body or the sensual areas of the body are the same. Of course they are. But for the female Muslim, it is obligatory to cover the hair and recommended, according to a number of the scholars, to cover the face, but not obligatory. Whereas for the non-Muslim, it is not obligatory to cover the hair. And in her society and in our culture, we do not recognize a woman who doesn't cover her hair to be immodest or to be provocative or to be all those negative kind of words that we hold when you think of a woman being loose or whatever kind of horrible phrase that comes to your mind. A woman who doesn't cover her hair doesn't fall into that category. However, those that wear provocative clothes such as very short skirts, mini skirts, very short other clothes and so on and so forth, and are intentionally trying to express their body in a disgusting way, that's actually rejected by their own society. That's rejected by their own community. They wouldn't be able to walk into a church like that, except that everyone would look at them in a very bad way. They wouldn't be able to walk into any prayer gathering of any religion, except that they would be criticized for it. So I think that whilst we still want to allow non-Muslims to come into the masjid, we need to recognize that modesty is not something which we apply upon a people according to our standards, but according to what is allowed in their general religion and societal understanding. So therefore, I don't believe it's necessary to have to make a female visitor to wear a scarf. I sometimes think it can be seen also disrespectful, but I do believe it's acceptable that in the invitation you sent to them prior, that you say please wear modest clothing, and then you'll find people wearing trousers, women wearing trousers covering their legs and so on and so forth. And I think that's reasonable. I think that's respectful. I think that's a fair request. And I'm not going to say that a person who insists that a woman wears the hijab is doing something haram. I just think it's unnecessary. And certainly from an Islamic point, it is not something which is required. I think with this balance, we can achieve the open house nature that we want for the masjid, for people to come and find out, and for them to benefit from the lectures and events that we hold. And do not belittle the impact that even a normal prayer will have, the normal sajda. You know, you're dealing with the people who've not seen people prostrate. You're dealing with the people who've not seen people wholeheartedly submit to something without being forced to, or at the point of a gun. They'll see that these people doing it willingly at strange hours, regularly. It impacts upon people. And if you're involved at the early stages of developing a dawah center or a masjid, keep this idea in mind of having a viewing area, a viewing angle, a room that has one of those mirrors where they can't even be seen. Even that's not a problem. A little place. We start to need that now for the new kind of generation. A place where they can sit and have tea, watch a video, watch something. And if that's side by side with one of those one-way mirrors or like a glass kind of partition where they can watch the jama'ah, you're going to get the best of both worlds. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi وبركاته.